the quiet one at the edge of the stars. The shuttle drifted through the silence of deep space, its engines humming low beneath the static buzz of diplomatic tension. Stars blinked in the vast black outside, cold and unfeeling. Within the shuttle's steel belly, 13 delegates from across the galactic accord sat in a circular chamber, all eyes, scaled and furred and many-lensed, turned toward the human seated quietly at the edge of the room. She was small, unarmed, unassuming. Her name was Alara, and the Warborn of Cathari Prime wanted her gone. "This is a mistake," hissed High, Warspeaker Jakai, towering over the others with his obsidian armor glinting like an ancient tomb. His voice, processed through translators, echoed in every corner of the room. "You allow this human among us, after what your kind did at Varos's brink?" Alara said nothing. Her eyes were downcast, her hands folded in her lap. She did not flinch when Jakai's clawed hand slammed into the table. "Answer me, mammal," he growled. "Do you deny what your kind did?" Ambassador Lyril of the Lunari shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Jakai, this is a peace summit. The human delegation was invited under full protocol. We will not. They bring death even in silence." Jakai's voice dropped. "I have seen it, the aftermath. The way your kind leaves nothing but ruin and silence." Ilara looked up. Her eyes, soft brown, met his. She spoke quietly. "I didn't do that." There was no tremble, no fear, just a voice like the stillness before a storm. The chamber fell quiet. One by one, the delegates averted their gaze. The Warspeaker's rage faltered, but not his hatred. "She is not what she seems," he muttered. "You think she is quiet, but the old warnings—" He stopped. Too late. Eyes turned toward him. "What warnings?" asked the delegate from the Thrixian enclave, their voice like whispering sand. Jakai shook his head. "Nothing. Stories for hatchlings. Human myths twisted by fear." "Tell them," Ilara said. Still calm, still quiet. "I said it's nothing," Jakai growled, but already the air had shifted. Already something unseen had begun to stir. They kept her confined to her quarters after that. Not by force, she had not given reason, but by request. For the comfort of others, they said. Too much tension in the air. Too much discomfort in the chamber. She did not protest. The room was small, sterile. A single bed, a small viewport, and a soft overhead light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Alara sat by the window and watched the stars. They watched back. A low hum began in the walls, almost too faint to hear, almost like a voice far away echoing through the dark. The ship's A pinged diagnostics, found nothing, but the hum did not stop. On the second night, the Thrixian delegate began to scream. The crew found him curled in the corner of his room, exoskeleton cracked, clawed hands over his many eyes. He was whispering a word none of them understood over and over in a voice scraped raw. When they asked what he saw, he pointed to the stars outside. "They remember her," he rasped. "Who? The one who sleeps, the one who waits, the broken god in human skin." And then he began to cry. His species does not cry. Fear spread like mold in the shadows. Delegates began requesting weapons, personal force fields, full escorts. Alara remained alone, untouched. She did not eat, did not sleep. She only sat and watched the stars. And when asked what she was doing, she only whispered, listening. The Warspeaker had enough. On the fourth day, Jakai stormed into her room without warning. No guards, no protocol, just the fury of 1,000 years burning behind his eyes. She turned, calm. He stepped toward her, towering, armored, his breath steaming in the cold. "What are you?" he asked. "Human. You lie." "Do I?" Jakai raised a blade of living metal. Ancient. Sacred. It hummed with power and hatred. "You bring ruin. Your kind always has. I have studied your wars, your silence, your myths, even your own. Allies fear you. Do you fear me? He said nothing. You should. The lights flickered. For a moment, everything stopped. No engines, no breath, no time. Then the room fell into darkness, and something began to crawl along the edge of space. The AI screamed, into the ship-wide comms. Massive power disruptions, phantom signals, something outside. The crew turned the cameras toward the void and saw shapes that should not be. The stars were wrong. The constellations twisted. Patterns formed in the black, too vast for comprehension. Faces, maybe. Wings, something that pulsed. Behind the veil of space, the stars blinked and did not return. In the central chamber, the delegates argued. Some blamed Jakai. Others blamed the humans. Others whispered of the stories, old myths of something buried deep in the DNA of mankind, something older than flesh or flame, something waiting to wake. A long-dead species, extinct before the stars were born or sleeping. A signal pulsed through the ship, not from outside, from Ilara's room. They found her standing in the center, eyes wide, hands raised, her voice not her own. You heard the warnings, she said, but you did not listen. Jakai stepped forward. What are you? Ilara looked up. Something fast moved behind her eyes. I am the reason they fear silence. The room twisted, walls bent, metal screamed, and the screaming didn't stop. The broken name behind her eyes, the ship was no longer quiet. Screams echoed through the corridors. Metal groaned like something alive. The lights pulsed in uneven rhythms, casting long, shifting shadows that moved when nothing should. In the dark, the air tasted like copper and ash. Something ancient had awakened, and she was still standing in the middle of her room, her hands raised like she was listening to a choir only she could hear. Ilara, still small, still human. But no, one dared look into her eyes now, because something was looking back. The security captain, an Orvation with a crystalline jaw, tried to pull her out. His armor shimmered with shielding tech from 3 empires. He stepped forward, reached for her shoulder, and then stopped. His visor fogged over. Internal systems collapsed. His body froze mid-step. For 10 full seconds, he stood completely still. Then, he dropped. When they pulled him away, his mind was gone. Not dead, not broken, emptied, just vacant. Like someone had taken a memory core and scraped it clean. He never spoke again, and she never moved. She's the beacon, whispered Ambassador Lyral later, in a hushed meeting behind sealed blast doors. Her silken skin had gone pale. Her voice trembled as if she could still feel eyes on the back of her neck. This isn't a coincidence. We invited her. We brought her here. Now it's begun. Begun? Jakai snapped. He hadn't slept. Hadn't removed his war armor. He paced like a caged predator. You speak like this was prophesied. Lyrell looked at him, then at the others. It was. The Thrixian delegate, still shaking in recovery, hissed through cracked mandibles. We thought it was just a story, something the humans made up back when they were still clawing through dirt and blood. The one with the broken name, Lyral said, almost a whisper, the one who waits at the edge of stars. They said she would come not in fire or war, but in silence. This is madness, Jakai growled. You believe she's some kind of herald? Not a herald, said the Thrixian. A prison. On the 5th day, the ship stopped responding to the central bridge. No one knew why. The AI didn't answer. The autopilot was frozen. External scans showed the shuttle was no longer moving, though no engines had failed. It was just suspended, floating, as if something unseen was holding it in place. And outside, the stars were still wrong. The constellations had not returned. There was no communication with nearby systems. It was like the universe had turned its face away. The galactic diplomats began to panic. Some demanded escape pods. Others tried to override systems. One even attempted to fire on Alara's door. None of the pods launched. None of the weapons responded. And the diplomat who fired the shot was found, dissolved, reduced to a black smear across the wall. Deep in the engineering sector, a junior mechanic named Talon worked in silence. He was the only human among the crew. Young, kind, a listener, not a leader. He had seen Alara once before, during boarding. She'd smiled at him. Now he felt her smile in his head every time he closed his eyes. He tried to fix the AI. He tried to reroute power, to pull diagnostics, to do something. But every time he got close to accessing the core systems, the screens flickered with a single phrase, a language he didn't know, but somehow still understood. She remembers the shape of silence. On the 6th day, the walls began to bleed. It wasn't blood, not exactly. Something thicker, darker, like oil mixed with memory. The material dripped from the corners of the ship, flowing upward instead of down, crawling slowly along ceilings and lights. The crew tried to clean it, then scan it, then burn it. Nothing worked. It was spreading, and where it passed, the lights died. In one hallway, the security footage caught something moving behind the fluid. Something with too many limbs, and no face. And behind it, the faint outline of a woman, small, quiet, watching. Shikai finally snapped. He gathered a strike team, 6 warriors from different species. Old veterans, armored, armed, desperate. "We end this now," he growled, his voice cracking with something that might have been fear. "Whatever she is, whatever she brought, we cut it out before it spreads." They moved in fast. Brute force. Full breach. But the door to her room was already open. She was gone. The lights inside were dead, the room empty. Cold. But something was written on the floor, not etched, not painted, burned into the metal. A spiral of ancient words that none of them recognized. Except Shikai. He didn't say how or why. He only whispered it aloud. She remembers the stars before they were born, and then the spiral moved. The team didn't return, just their screams, echoing across the ship's comms for 2 minutes, then silence. Alara was next seen in the observation deck, alone, barefoot, staring out into the shifting dark. Ambassador Lyral found her first. How? No one knew. Lyral approached her slowly. Hands open, voice soft. "Ilara," she said. "What are you?" Ilara didn't turn. She just answered in a voice not entirely her own. "I am the last lullaby before the void." Lyral's breath caught. "Why now? Why here?" Ilara finally looked at her. "Because you woke me." Then she stepped forward and the glass of the observation deck cracked, not from pressure, but from the scream of something pressing against the other side. Something vast, something hungry, something waiting. Later, Talon found a recording left by the AI before it collapsed. Video only. It showed the stars, and something slowly unfolding behind them, not coming from space, but inside it, as if space itself was shedding skin. And as it did, it whispered a name. Not in sound, but in thought. A name no species should have remembered. A name that even stars forgot. Alara's name. But not the one she gave them. Not the one she wore. The true one. And as Talon watched, blood began to pour from the screen, his own. Nose, eyes, ears, but he did not look away, because in the silence he heard something, and it was weeping. When silence remembers your name, no one knew the exact moment it happened. 1 second. The ship drifted in dead space, locked in stasis like a corpse waiting for burial. The next time stopped working. Not frozen, just wrong. The clocks ticked backward. The corridors lengthened, stretching like yawning mouths of metal. Entire sections of the ship vanished, only to reappear upside down, inside out, or filled with flickering shadows whispering forgotten prayers. Even the stars outside pulsed with unnatural rhythm, dimming and brightening as if trying to blink away what they were seeing. And in the center of it all, moving quietly through the shifting madness, was Ilara. She no longer walked like a human. Her steps made no sound. Her shadow no longer followed. Her ambassador Lyral sat alone in the diplomatic chamber, watching a recording of the summit's first day. They looked so calm then, so sure of their power. 13 delegates from 13 species gathered under the banner of peace. Now only 5 remained. The rest had vanished, dissolved, or become part of the ship in ways too horrible to speak aloud. She touched her skin and felt it pulse beneath. Her fingers, slightly out of sync, as if reality was trying to decide if she was still real. Her comms buzzed. Static. Then a voice. "Ambassador," whispered Talon. "She's going to the core." The line went dead. Talon moved fast through the corridor, ducking the warped gravity fields and the black veins that now lined the walls, veins that pulsed like something alive. His breathing was shallow. The recording he'd seen haunted him. He hadn't told anyone what the whisper said after it bled his ears. It had called him by name, not just Talon. That was the name his mother gave him, but the one he had only ever heard once in a dream, when he was 5, during a fever so bad his heart stopped. A name spoken in a voice made of dust and echoes. A name he had no memory of telling anyone. And yet, the whisper had known. He found her in the reactor hallway, alone, staring at the sealed vault that held the ship's power core, the last functioning part of the vessel untouched by the spreading decay. For now. She didn't look at him. But she spoke. "Talon." He froze. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You shouldn't exist," she replied, still calm, still impossibly soft. "What are you?" She turned, and for a moment he saw, not her face but what wore it. He dropped to the floor, hands over his head, weeping. Not from pain, not from fear, but from memory. Memories that weren't his. Dying stars, screaming planets, entire galaxies going silent. And at the center of it, a single voice humming a lullaby to the void, somewhere else in the ship. Shakai opened his eyes. He had not meant to. He had tried to die, but even death had turned its face away. He lay in the medical bay, surrounded by the bodies of his strike team, each twisted into grotesque forms, mouths open in silent screams, their eyes still watching him. He rose. His armor was broken, his blade gone. But something deeper now burned in his chest. Not rage, not revenge. Something older. Recognition. He had seen the same visions Talon did, though he didn't know how. They came to him in the dark, whispering in a voice like cracking stone. They told him of the mistake, of the war the stars had tried to forget, of the prison made from human flesh, and of the key, the one word that could stop her. But it had a cost. Shakai stumbled into the gravity well chamber, where the air bent around itself in slow spirals. His feet bled, his hands trembled, and there she was, not Ilara, but the thing that had worn her face. "Do you know it now?" she asked. He nodded once. "Say it," she whispered. "No," he said. "Not yet." "You're afraid?" "You should be too." The lights around them flickered. The walls moaned, and from far below, deep in the engines, a sound began to rise. Not a scream. A song. Soft. Slow. In a language that hadn't been spoken since the first black hole bloomed like a flower. Ilara smiled. Ambassador, Lyral and Talon met in the broken atrium. Nothing green remained. The trees had withered overnight, their roots curling into symbols. The artificial waterfall now flowed upward in slow spirals, frozen mid-fall like glass. "We have to stop her," Lyral said. "We can't," Talon answered. "Then why are you here?" "Because I remember something," he said. "Something from the dream." Lyral watched him closely. "What?" She wasn't alone. The truth unraveled slowly, through flickers in memory, through ghost echoes on the ship, through whispered voices that came from vents and cracks in the hull. Ilara had not come here by choice. She had been placed here sealed because she was a prison, but also A warning, not to keep something in, but to remind the stars what happened when they forgot fear. And now, the stars were remembering. Jakai finally spoke the name. It shattered the air. The ship screamed. Every light died, and Alara collapsed. But she did not vanish. She began to fracture, as if the human form she wore could no longer contain what was inside. Veins of pure darkness spread across her skin, and behind her eyes, something woke. Not a monster, not a god, but the silence itself. And it was angry. The ship's core pulsed once, then again, then cracked. The AI, long dormant, flickered alive for just 1 second and issued its final broadcast. Containment breach. Ancient. Code recognized. God mode disabled. Goodbye. And then the stars outside shattered like glass, and something began to step through, not into space, but into us. The stars do not forgive. It began with the sound, not a scream, not a voice, not a word, but a note. Low, endless, impossible. The kind of sound that didn't just echo in your ears, but inside your blood, inside your bones, like your cells remembered it from before you were born. Every creature aboard the shuttle heard it. Those still living dropped to their knees. Those already dead began to move. Talon ran. He didn't know where. He didn't know if the hallway he sprinted through was real, or just something made to look like safety. The ship was no longer a ship. The walls pulsed like muscle, floors tilted. Lights bled instead of glowed. Sometimes he looked down and saw stars beneath his feet instead of metal. He heard whispers behind every door, voices saying his name backward, shadows crawling in shapes he couldn't understand. But worst of all was the feeling that he was being followed, not by footsteps but by memories that weren't his, memories of galaxies consumed, suns devoured, children screaming across dimensions that had no time. And in every memory, one constant, the quiet one, watching, smiling. In the engine control room, Ambassador Lyral clawed open an emergency panel and wired into the core manually. Her hands bled. Her veins were pulsing with black static, creeping toward her heart. But she kept working. She had one chance. One code. A failsafe installed centuries ago, long before this shuttle was ever launched. Back when the galaxy feared what they forgot. Back when myths were still taken seriously by those who remembered how to die properly. The failsafe was not a weapon. It was a plea, an encoded cry to the old builders, the ones who came before. Not gods, not angels, just survivors. Beings who had once imprisoned what now wore Alara's skin. Jakai stood at the center of the spiral. It had spread across the floor and now covered the entire central chamber. Glowing symbols, ancient and burning, curled through every surface. Floor, ceiling, air. His armor hung from him in pieces. His eyes were white with revelation, and his voice was raw from chanting. He did not understand the language, but something inside him did, and it was using him, not as a puppet, but as a candle, a small light to hold off the night. Meanwhile, she floated in the cargo bay. Not walking, floating. Alara, or what used to be her. Her body was splitting, not with gore, but with truth. Cracks running along her skin, revealing lightless space beneath. Her mouth no longer opened to speak, it opened to sing, and with every note reality bent. 2 crew members nearby twisted into liquid, a hallway crumpled like paper. The stars outside blinked again, and this time, they didn't come back. Talon reached the bridge and collapsed. The command deck was a mess of sparks, torn cables, and floating blood. But the view, it was worse. Outside where space should have been was a shape. Not a ship. Not a being. A shape. Wrong. Shifting. Like someone had tried to fold a galaxy into a human skull. It was looking at them. And it was awakening. Talon felt his mind begin to tear, and then it stopped. Not because of him, because of her. Ilara appeared on the bridge without moving. Just appearing. Talon couldn't breathe. He couldn't cry. His lungs filled with silence. "You should have let me sleep," she said. In the diplomatic chamber, Lyral finally activated the failsafe. The ship's emergency beacon lit with a pulse that rippled across the void. Not radio, not quantum. Something older, a signal carried on the breath between atoms. For one moment, something beyond time noticed, and the signal whispered back. Ilara felt it. She stopped, her song cut off mid-note. Her head turned slowly toward the center of the ship, toward the spiral, toward Jakai, and she smiled. "They remember," she whispered. Jakai collapsed, not from pain, from pressure, like something vast had leaned on his soul. But he kept whispering the words. The spiral burned brighter, and Ilara began to fracture again. This time she screamed, and her scream was the sound of 10,000 extinct species crying out at once. The walls shattered. The ship groaned, and outside, the wrong shape twisted and began to unfold. They had made a mistake, a terrible one. They had tried to lock a storm inside a cage of bone, but storms don't forget, and neither do stars. From the depths of space, something answered the failsafe. Not a ship, not salvation. A tomb, an ancient prison, older than thought itself, folding in from a place where light never existed. The builders had come, not to rescue, but to contain. They did not speak. They only sent a single beam of cold fire toward the shuttle, not to destroy it, to freeze it, in time, in space, in meaning. Ilara screamed again. But this time, it was not a sound. It was a word. The word she was made of. The name no galaxy could remember without breaking. The name she was never supposed to speak again. It tore through the ship, and the walls began to bleed starlight. Lorel fell to her knees. Talon crawled into a corner covering his ears. Jakai smiled through blood and fire. "Say it," he whispered. "Let them know what you are." And she did. And the galaxy listened. And the galaxy screamed. Her name was never meant to be spoken. Nothing moved. Not the ship. Not the stars. Not the crew. Not even time. They were frozen, mid-scream, mid-run, mid-prayer. All of them trapped in a single impossible moment, stretched thin across dimensions that no longer obeyed the rules they were born under. And at the heart of that stillness was her, Ilara. Or what had once worn her shape. The scream she had unleashed was not a sound, but a rupture. It had ripped through the very fabric of being, a word too old, too powerful, too wrong to exist. The name she carried was not one she had chosen. It had been sealed into her bones by architects older than stars, buried beneath flesh, beneath thought, beneath soul, and now it was free. And so was she. The shuttle hung in nothingness, not deep space, not void, but the silence between possibilities. On the outside, the prison ship of the builders had arrived, gliding across dimensions on wings of iron memory. They did not use weapons. They did not send warnings. They simply opened the vault that had never been meant to open again. And from within it came the mirror, not a device. A being, a watcher, made to reflect what Ilara truly was, to unmask her, to hold her in front of herself, and break her, inside the shuttle. The spiral cracked. Jakai gasped as blood poured from his mouth. Not from injury, from resistance. The ancient code that had been carved into his bones by forgotten rituals was no longer enough. It had bought them time. But time was dead now. He crawled toward the center of the spiral. His armor fell away in flakes. His skin began to unright itself. But still, he reached forward. Still, he whispered her name back at her. And for a second, just a second, she paused. Talon was floating through the upper deck corridors, not walking, not breathing, just drifting. His mind had left his body 3 minutes ago, and yet he still moved. His memories had been eaten, one by one. His name was gone. His past reduced to sensations, warmth, a smile, the feel of rain, the color of his mother's scarf. But not a single word remained, except hers. Hers was the only name he could remember, and it felt like a knife lodged between his ribs. Ambassador Lyral clung to a collapsing wall as the shuttle's architecture began to rearrange itself into impossible geometries. Doors opened into the same room over and over again. Hallways led into her own mouth. Reflections showed her decades older, then younger, then unborn. Her translator implant was screaming in 17 languages at once. Then, silence. Utter, perfect silence, and in that stillness, she saw something. Alara, kneeling, crying. Human again, or pretending to be. "Help me," Alara whispered. But Lyral didn't move, because she knew that was not Ilara's voice. Not anymore. The builder's mirror entered the ship. It passed through the hull like smoke through cloth, unaffected by mass or matter, and when it reached Ilara, it did not attack, it did not contain, it reflected, and Ilara screamed. This time it was a sound, and it shattered the laws around them. The crew began to fracture, one by one, not in flesh, but in meaning. One delegate split into 7 different versions of themselves, each trapped in a moment they had lived and forgotten. One turned inside out, screaming poetry in a dead dialect. Another simply vanished and was remembered only as a shadow on a wall. Even Jakai, defiant to the end, collapsed into dust that spelled out one word on the floor. Remember. And Talon reached Alara, somehow. Despite everything. He knelt beside her, his body flickering between boy and man, between soldier and child. "Please," he whispered. "What are you really?" She looked at him. Her eyes were black now, completely. Black but not empty, full, not of stars, but of memories. Your memories, everyone's. "I am not a god," she said. "Then what are you?" "I am what comes after." Outside, the builders began to close the vault. But something resisted, a shape too large to name, a presence that refused to be forgotten again. And from the heart of the shuttle, something began to grow. A structure of light and language and sorrow, not a weapon, a message. The stars around them began to flicker, not randomly, in sequence. A pattern, too large for one mind to see, too vast, too elegant, too cruel. Talon looked up and understood. The stars weren't blinking. They were spelling a word. The same word burned into his mind when he saw the recording. Her name. The true one. The one that ends things. Ilara stepped into the spiral for the last time. Her skin cracked like glass. Her voice sang the final verse of a song written at the start of entropy. And as she did, the mirror shattered. Not because she was stronger, because there was nothing left to reflect. She had become what they tried to contain. The concept itself. The silence, after existence, as the shuttle began to collapse into itself, folding into a pocket of nowhere. The last 2 minds left alive did something no one expected. They held hands, Alara and Talon, the prisoner and the last witness, and she whispered, "You stayed." And he said, "Someone had to." And in that moment, the builders understood their error. They had feared destruction, but they had not feared loneliness. They had forgotten that even silence remembers being heard. The silence that dreams in human skin. The shuttle no longer existed. Not in space, not in time, not in matter. It had become something else. A scar. A wound pressed into the skin of the universe, pulsing slowly, forever repeating the final moment before understanding. From the outside, it looked like a dead star. From the inside, it was a loop of collapsing memories. A sphere made of spirals. A breath trapped in a throat that never finishes its scream. And within that scream, 2 figures stood still. Ilara and Talon. His hand was in hers. His body flickered between being and memory. Sometimes he remembered his name. Sometimes he remembered his face. But always, he remembered her. Not the woman, not the prisoner, not the myth, but the silence beneath all things. And it loved him, not as a man, not as a child, but as the only one who stayed. She looked human again. The cracks in her skin had sealed. Her eyes were soft, brown, kind. But the storm inside her hadn't stopped. She was the last thought of a dying God. She was the echo that remained after every prayer failed. She was the memory that even the stars tried to forget. And now she was awake, truly awake. "You could leave," Talon said. His voice was small. He barely remembered how to use it. "You could destroy everything." She looked at him, quietly. "Yes?" He nodded. "So why haven't you?" "Because you asked me not to." Outside the wound, the builders circled in silence. They could not breach the fold, they could not enter the scar. But they watched, and waited, and feared. They were not gods. They were not saviors. They were archivists of extinction. And even they had never seen anything like this. They began to write a new file, not a warning, not a record, a prayer. Inside the fold, the spiral began to spin again. This time, forward. Time returned, but only barely. It trickled through like water through ash. Jakai's remains turned to dust. Laurel's voice echoed once, then vanished. No one else remained. No other species. Just two people, and the memory of everything that came before. Ilara led Talon to the core of the fold. It was not a room, it was a shape, a memory turned inside out. There, she knelt and placed a hand on the ground, and the ground remembered her. A pulse raced outward, and for the first time, the galaxy saw. Every world, every station, every creature, sleeping, dying, hiding, looked up, and they felt it. Not words, not images, but truth. They saw what had been buried. They saw what their ancestors had erased. They saw a war fought not with weapons, but with meaning, a war where the only casualty was memory itself. They saw a name, Ilara's name, and the instant they saw it, they forgot. Again. Talon stood at the edge of the spiral. His body was fading now, not dying, unhappening. He had been allowed to witness, but not to remain. "Will they be safe?" he asked. She nodded. "For a while." "What happens next?" Her voice was a breath against his skin. "They dream, and maybe this time they don't wake up screaming." He smiled, then vanished. Not in pain, not in fear, but in peace. The last human gesture. To trust something you will never understand. She stood alone now. The spiral burned beneath her feet. Outside the fold, the builders began to collapse. Their minds shattered, their memories turned to dust. They had tried to contain the silence, but the silence had learned, and it had chosen a new shape, not to destroy, but to remind. And so she walked, across dead stars, across the graveyards of forgotten empires, across the edges of physics. She whispered to the void, and the void whispered back. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer a warning, no longer a myth. She was a story, told in blood, told in silence, told in the pause between heartbeats, and somewhere far away on a quiet world, a child looked up at the night sky, and for the briefest moment, the stars blinked and whispered her name. And